Hello and welcome to the Sociology Staffroom. I'm Katie Tyler and I've got a guest today, Corinne, who has 20 years plus of teaching experience, head of sociology within a school, and is going to come and talk to us about ethnicity and sociology within the curriculum. So first of all, thank you for your time today.
It's good. I'm honoured to be here.
Oh, I'm honoured to have you. I really am. This is something that I'm obviously ethnicity is one of sort of the core synoptic links that run through all our topics, isn't it? You know, class, age, gender, ethnicity, sexuality, and so it is, you know, a constant theme within sociology. And personally, it's one of my, I suppose, motivations to take sociology. I think when I was thinking about when I was 16 years old. Obviously, maybe people don't know, I'm mixed ethnicity myself, half Filipino, half English. So when I was studying in the 90s, I actually had a subject that I could feel like I could relate to. So it's not just teaching it. For many of our students, it's something that will answer lots of internal burning questions. And for some students, it's something they've never really had the space to talk about. So it's a big responsibility, I feel, teaching sociology in a topic that more increasingly recently, there has been lots of discussion around ethnicity. It's come to the forefront a lot more, whereas I think historically it maybe hasn't so much. I think there's been a definite movement with our students. So I still really want to unpick, you know, how as a fellow colleague, as a teacher, as a head of sociology, how you go around teaching ethnicity within education. So I suppose it's quite a broad question for you to begin with. You know, how do you sort of address ethnicity within education, within school? Because obviously within sociology, I think what I said to you, I think when we were sort of in contact in the past, some of the students feel less comfortable with talking about it. Some students feel more comfortable talking about ethnicity. So how do you broach it? How do you engage the students in that debate and feeling comfortable with that?
I suppose, when I talk about sociology within my school, we're lucky we've got quite a diverse population. And so sometimes it's really about what unites us rather than what divides us. And so, I tend to go for the option of culture and identity. And that's the first thing I teach, because it's a good basics, good foundation. And then within that, when we look at start looking at subcultures and cultures, I tend to get them to do a little culture project, so that they will look at their other subcultures or cultures, and they tend to all look at them. So recently, last a few months ago, they did their own, and somebody came from the Polish point of view, somebody who came from a Filipino point of view, and just giving the sort of the norms and values, the changes, the laws, and all that that's happening in their country. And it was so interesting to see that there was a lot of common themes as well as differences, and I think that helped to, especially in the beginning of year 12, it helped to kind of unite us. Sound like a functionist here, but we had that. This is what sociology is going to be about. It's looking at what we share, but also what divides us. And so, that kind of, and then later on, I kind of build on that. Sort of bringing ethnicity, as you said, in a synoptic way. So, if we're looking at class, and we're looking at class within gender, then female, black females, white females, Asian, Muslim, and just try and keep on building on that throughout the 2 years. It's not always easy, depending on the constraints, but that's what I try to do.
It's interesting you mentioned a project right at the beginning. Something we've interviewed Dr. Caroline Oliver from UCL, and she was talking about a project that she does with students around identity, and she gets them to do a project as well as part of her research, and that's really interesting that you sort of do something similar. I was thinking myself, actually, because I've chosen to do cultural identity as my next topic as well. As a shift from beliefs, and I thought that I might do something like that, some sort of maybe some photography based reflection on identity and culture, and so that's really interesting. How do the students respond to that initiative? Because obviously you teach that first, so they because obviously I was thinking about the sensitivity of maybe, is it their own culture and identity, or is it other culture?
I give them a choice, and a lot of them choose their own. And I think the reason why some of them choose their own, some of them know a little bit about it, some of them don't, and it gives them an opportunity to really, and they, what comes really across is how proud they are of their own ethnicity. They really like excel in showing pictures, and sometimes they bring in food, and sometimes they bring in artifacts from their country to show. And it's it, that really impresses me, how proud they are of their own, their own family, their own traditions. So even in this, this age, they still hold, as young people, a lot of them still hold on to those traditions, and they visit back home and all the rest of it. So yeah, I think and that kind of comes across, and everybody's like, oh, and they ask each other questions about it. So yeah, it really kind of creates an atmosphere of, I suppose, safe
Mm.
space to talk about my difference and talk about my culture. And it's not, it's in a positive, yeah, it's great, this is what we do and this is how we eat. And but like one girl was talking about her country and the conflict that was going on there, but it was seen as a balance, because even though she knew the conflict, she still loved her country. And so that was really interesting to see her point of view as a young person.
Interesting, because I said, like, I think there's an important word that you said there, was making the students feel safe. I know in the past, I don't know if you've had this, students feeling, can we talk, are we allowed to talk about this? And there's something I sort of mentioned to you when we were sort of in contact before, that I suppose what I have noticed that some students feel, and I think it's about creating that safe environment that you said, is feeling, oh, am I being racist to talk about ethnicity? And somehow they've got that communication. I don't know where that's come from. I can't pinpoint where that's come from them as individuals. But to have the opportunity to talk about it, they're like, are we allowed to talk about this? I don't know if have you had the same experience or not? It might just be me and where my experience is, but some of the students are a bit sort of shocked when we're talking about ethnicity, and I'm picking that, particularly when we sort of do. I don't know, for me, I found it quite difficult for some students to talk about race, ethnicity, culture, and identity, and some students have found that quite a difficult, challenging debate. I'm interested in finding your views on that.
I think sometimes it can depend on the makeup of your class, over the years. Um, I- I've had times when I've had so many diverse cultures, and maybe one, I suppose you could argue, British person in there, and um, but sometimes it's looking at their ethnicity, because sometimes you're looking at it from a class or all right. So if I look at it, for example, I had a girl who's Irish, um, and the rest of the class was sort of, you could argue, different ethnicities, Black, Asian, and a few different other ones. And I kind of related it back, because she was very close to Ireland, so relating the ethnicity back to Ireland. And you know, so when we talk about communities, I kind of said, well, how is it in how is it in Ireland? I'm sorry, the thing just dropped there.
Okay. Oh, that's just life, isn't it? That's okay.
Yeah. How is it in Ireland? So sometimes it is relating it back to the ethnicity as well as race. But I think by saying it's okay to have your opinion and to encourage that, because sometimes people might say, well, I don't want to. If we talk about white privilege, all right,
Mm,
other white people in the class going to feel, they can't say that it either exists or not, or they haven't got an opinion because they might get shouted down by the others in the class or whatever it is. But sometimes I kind of take it and say, well, white privilege is not an individualized thing.
mm,
It's something that is a concept. Yeah, so it's not whether you are feeling that; it's what do you think in society. So to make it more of a macro thing
mm,
there, that safety, to give it that and that discussion, and they feel more able to discuss it as a concept rather than as an individual thing there. Yeah.
mm,
So it's really, I think, with sociology, it's really sort of encouraging. And I don't know for others, but we don't do GCSE, so it's really important in the beginning of year 12 to get that culture of safety, that culture of being of discussion. That might take some time depending on your students, but really, and I think by doing those things, bringing in contemporary issues, which isn't always easy again, all right, but just having that discussion about what do you think was going on, you know, what's the talk on social media, what's this, what's that, then they're able to kind of say, well, I've heard this, I've listened to that. So it isn't always about, oh, I think, yeah, you know, and whether you agree with it or not. So it's really just trying to create that atmosphere that's, as we talked about, that safety there.
Yeah, it's
That's
making
how I
it sort
find
of,
it.
yeah, no, it's correct me if I'm right, if I've understood this correctly. So obviously it's creating that safe culture. And on one hand, although we did talk about making it relatable to students, but obviously it's their choice in order to do that, in order not to spotlight students, which I think is obviously really important as well. But in addition to that, is almost keep it relatively theoretical so it isn't personalised. So it's like bringing, you know, like you said, debates within social media that might be happening, but looking at through the lens of theories rather than I think, which then is a bit makes you feel a bit safer because they're saying, well, functionists would think this, you know, triple system feminists would think this, and so on and so on. So there isn't that, I suppose, ownership. Is that right? Like they're not saying I think that. It creates that safety, that buffer for them. Is that what you were sort of saying? Is that, am I right in interpreting that?
It is, and then as time goes on, they can. Some of them are comfortable right in the beginning and think, "Oh, I think this and I think that," and that's great. If not, then yes, you can say, "Well, you know, do you think the functionists have a point? Do you think this sociologist has a point about whether, um, you know, the elites or the upper class or whatever the white this or the black this or whatever? You know, do you agree with that? You know, I mean." Sue I don't always agree with, but you know, he's
Mm.
there. Yeah. What do you think, you know, about what Sue has to say as a black sociologist, but talking about black people, maybe in more of a blame culture? So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, where the controversy is, and then
Mm.
getting that going, do you know what I mean? And I think that helps a lot. And so, and then sometimes that, those opinions that you think well might come from the maybe you know the white or whatever comes from the black people themselves. So it's always about challenging stereotypes, challenging views, challenging what they hear. Yeah, you know, how do you know? Well, I heard it, I read it, I this that. Well, let's
Mm.
challenge it. Yeah, let's talk. You know, what have your experience and maybe what you can bring into this. You know, or your friend's experience. Because again, we never know. You know, what family makeup that the child has. You know, they might be a child who's got a white auntie or whatever it is. So you know, it's that's interesting to see what, and they tend to bring that in, and so you encourage that because now they realise they've got different opinions, different options, different thoughts based on their own experience that they can bring in. And then does that relate to back to sociology? Yeah. So it tends to be trying to bring always keeping sociology at the front, but as you know, relating it to their experience so that they can identify and then evaluate and argue their points. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like the point you mentioned about you know, creating that, like, the evaluation, that sort of criticism or the counter argument. You know, I think it's sort of it's almost like presenting the information, and then from that, then it's sort of thinking, well, like obviously you mentioned Swell there and Sewell there, and then obviously that is contentious debate, and obviously you've got to be careful as a sociology teacher not to be biased, aren't you? Like it would be very easy for you to go whatever. I'm not going to state my opinion. I'm trying to be as neutral as possible, but you know, we might have an opinion on that, or may not. But then it's presenting the counter argument for that, I suppose, for those students and or for them to create a counter argument as well. Sort of slight movement from that because I sort of think that, you know, it's definitely safe space, depersonalize it where possible, not spotlighting, and obviously creating that sort of debate so that both sides of the argument are considered. You've also mentioned the importance of contemporary material, which there is a lot of it more recently. I personally, I don't know if you feel the same, in the last sort of, I say like since pandemic, actually, I would say there's a far greater contemporary material on around ethnicity. I don't know if you found the same.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that George Floyd, that thing really kind of
mm,
blew up, didn't it, I mean, and made everything very in your face,
mm,
from a local and a global point of view. Yeah.
mm. And then obviously we can discuss that with our students. My next question is, I suppose there's two bits of the question really. But I suppose they're the same question. I don't know if you've been thinking about this. This is something I'm sort of considering myself in my own teaching practice. Um, is how do we as sociology teachers look at our curriculum and in some way decolonize it, reduce this ethnocentricity within the potentially within the subject. So my first thought is the founding fathers, for that in quotes. In quotes, you know, how do I mean? I don't know. I would love to just hear like what you're thinking and your views and stuff. And something I'm personally searching around is okay. Yes, we teach class, gender, age, ethnicity. We look at statistics. Um, Obviously, you mentioned as well, but he's not the representative of all Black sociologists. Is there anything you sort of consider that we could do as sociology teachers within staying in the realms of the specification, but reducing this centricity of it and decolonising it as well, if possible?
Um, so when you say about the founding fathers, what are you saying that we need to expand on that or
I
build
don't.
from that?
I'm just sort of creating debate. I don't even know. Well, I do. I'm starting to look into it a little bit more. That they, potentially they're not the only founding fathers of sociology. Or see the research within that, and the Enlightenment potentially wasn't the Enlightenment. There's other empires and other experiences historically from different cultures that have had an impact. And just looking at sort of sociology, how we're becoming representative of a variety of sociologists and their work. And I think for me, I know I've been looking more at contemporary sociologists, where we're hearing voices of all different ethnic groups and genders and sexualities to be representative for the students. I know that there's been a sort of recent change in the teacher guides for some exam boards to be more representative. I think that's probably a good starting point, is looking at sociologists and sometimes looking at some of the examples that we use that are, like you said, challenging some of those stereotypes as well that are out there.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of, it may seem a little bit of, what's the word, tokenist, but sometimes what we do
Mm.
is band Black History Month, look at Black sociologists, and then you've got Du Bois, and and thinking about that, and just thinking, all right, so, and I think one of the things, the criticism is yes, you've got Durkheim and Weber and all the rest of it, all right, but how do they relate today, and what other sociologists we can bring in? So I think, you see, it's difficult because you're wanting to cover what's in the text to make sure that the students are quoting the right sociologists and all the rest of it. And, and how much scope do you have to bring in the contemporary sociologists, and will they be credited and all the rest of it? Are the examiners going to be aware of these contemporary? So you're constantly striking a balance. And I suppose I was just sort of also thinking, because it's, when I look on the Facebook, chat, you sort of think a lot of people have never had experience of sociology, and they're teaching sociology, and I feel really sort of sorry for them because you're just pushed into that, and so you're doing it literal. After 20 years, I've had to, there's ways I've kind of brought in ethnic things, and I was just wondering, there's the bottom up approach, but is it time for AQA and maybe other those to kind of be a bit more radical in? Because I look at the options that we teach, culture and identity, and even within that, could we have another option where we look at race in more detail and ethnicity in more detail, but make it more synoptic. So if you're looking at, or even looking at families, we look at families within a Muslim or within this, and then still relate it to class or still relate it to other cage, other aspects. And I think, as I said, with experience, you do bring that in, and you're trying hard. And I was thinking about those contemporary things. Yes, you've got the George Floyd, even the whole debate about Meghan Markle. Do we? You know, you can bring that in, but is there room? Yeah, and I think that's constantly the battle, and I just wish we had a bit more scope from AQA or whoever, OCL, whoever. It doesn't really matter. And again, sometimes you look at FSC and you're trying hard to also include the positive sides. I mean, if you look at immigration, I want to see, yes, immigration, and it's good that we look at the downside of it. But what about the positives? Let's look at that and what the contributions are, and the constant fight to get those contributions acknowledged within sociology, within the debates, within all those sorts of things. So yeah, I think it's just a balancing act for me. But like you said, I think it's being aware and being conscious and striving to always bring that in wherever you can. So yeah, I don't know the question, to be honest, but it's I think it's a conscious thing as a teacher to constantly think. And black, Asian, are we talking about race? Are we talking about ethnicity?
Or religion
Yeah.
sometimes. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Is having that debate. And well, I mean, funny enough, my students is just doing the same thing. They're doing some, they're doing a little bit of mini action research for methods, just so that before we do methods in context, so that it feels a bit more real for them. And they were just sort of creating a questionnaire, and then they sort of looking at the census way they divide ethnicity up, and they were going to use that as their, I suppose, their first questions, basing it on those questions. They were, what does it even mean? Like, what does white, black, and then we've got Caribbean in there, but then Caribbean is part of America, and they were like, and I think just even at that point, when I sat with them, I thought, do you know what, that's a good time to have a discussion debate, although we're not doing cultural identity next. Challenge that. Well, what do you think it means? What are the problems with these definitions? And I suppose, like what you just said, it's having it up there in your mind, because I think you said a really powerful point, that it's a balancing act between the things we have to teach versus all the contemporary stuff that we could bring in that is going to be meaningful to the students and enhance their learning without it going on a bit of a tangent. And I think it's cherry picking those bits, but also, like you said, having it in your mind that when there is those moments, creating that quick debate there and discussion, so they're having those thoughts and going, rather than thinking, oh well, I know we're going to cover that when we do culture and identity in like 3 weeks, 4 weeks time. Think, well, actually, yes, we are doing it in 4 weeks time, but we can have a quick discussion about this now, just to keep that debate live. Because they were like, I don't understand why there's colours in here, and then there's some ethnicities and there's some religions, and what does mixed other even mean? And creating that debate, which I suppose comes, like you said, from a safe environment.
Because sometimes, we talk about the social construction of race, but also the social construction of terminology that's changed. Afro-Caribbean, what does that mean? Coloured, mixed race. Well, is mixed race now? Is it not just black now? It can be other cultures within that, and just and the impact of those words that they've had in the past, and how it's changing, and how people are becoming more conscious of that. So I think that whole, for me, that term social construction is so important when looking at sociology in
So you're
every
making me
aspect.
laugh. I actually said that to my students yesterday. I said that is my favourite word in sociology, and it's funny you mentioned that. It's literally my favourite word, because I said exactly that. Everything is a construction, But sorry to interrupt you, because I had to say it made me laugh, because it's exactly what I said yesterday.
I'm constantly saying that because so it's a social because it is. It's just because things are changing constantly. Even the students themselves are like, oh God, yeah, and what it means here, what it means to be a child, what it means to be a young person, what it means to be old, what it means to be all those things. It's just, I feel like to me, it feels like it's just sped up, and I think that's just really important. And I think they seem to be getting that within that.
Yeah,
And
I almost feel the kids are more ahead than we are in some ways, because they obviously are on social media and TikTok or whatever, and they're covering debates that haven't really hit mainstream, culture, I suppose. I suppose it is mainstream for them, but not formal education. And we were talking, like, say that, see the ethnicity, and Black Caribbean was on there, and I said, and then they brought up the argument of colorism. Well, how does that work with that? And that's not something that's we inevitably we talk about within our textbooks and stuff. But yeah, it's such an important debate, which we could talk about forever. But at the same time, it's being aware that maybe that is important. That's something we could talk about, but not spend too long on in an exam to be descriptive, but definitely important, and value that for the students to bring that in. And I suppose, like you said, it comes back to what you just said, that balancing between that love for learning, the debate, and important discussions that need to be had, but also making sure that the students pass those exams as well. Are there any sort of final sort of words of wisdom from your experiences as a teacher for over 20 years in sociology, of anything that you think would be good for both experience and, as you mentioned earlier, really difficult for students, the teachers that are non-specialists, as well as obviously ECTs, that would help us navigate the teaching of ethnicity within sociology?
I think it's a bit like what we try to get the students to be, which is not always easy, but to be more conscious, to think in a wider, to think micro, to think macro as well, to see the smaller picture, the bigger picture. And I think it's also about, as I said to sometimes it's being sad. You see sociology in everything. And that's what I do. If I see if I watch a program or listen, it's all relates to sociology in my head. And so I think if a teacher really wants to sort of really get to enjoy it as well as teach it, because part of always with any subject, the part of it is to build your own love for the subject. And I think it's really, and I think we're lucky in sociology because there's so much going on. Outside of ethnicity, but within that, it's just being more conscious and being sort of maybe doing some reading, some listening, sort of being an ally of it, just finding out and thinking and maybe talking to other people, so you build up your own viewpoint, your own experience, but also, and then can you hinge it like we do with the students? Can you hinge it on a sociology? Can you hinge it on a perspective? And to me, that's where you kind of then it becomes the other way around, where you see sociology and you rate your experience of sociology rather than the other way around. So I think it's really about developing your love for the subject, but also just being more conscious of what is it you're teaching and your own biases, I suppose. As you said, we've got to be careful not to inflict that on the students, but we've also got to be aware, because you can't, because you've got to be aware of your own bias and your own viewpoints. Yeah. And so it's listening, and then it's presenting that information from whether you agree with it or not. Yeah. So yeah, if it's words of wisdom, is really just sort of develop your knowledge, look to be critical, look to evaluate, and then you can pass that on to your students. Yeah, that's what I would say. And with race and ethnicity, I think we've all got, whether you're black, white, or anything in between, we've all got some experience of division within that. And I think explaining it, and I look at ethnicity, and as we said, is it just about race? It is about ethnicity, and it is about, even if you're white and British, you're an ethnic group. So yeah, sorry, don't want to waffle on.
Oh no, I mean, obviously, thank you for that. Really, I don't want to add any more to it. So beautifully said. Like you said, yeah, develop that love for learning, critical thinking, and a non-biased attitude. But I did add more, but I was just summarising. But I don't. Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your enthusiasm. I really, really appreciate that, and lovely speaking to you, a fellow enthusiast of sociology. Oh, it's fantastic. Thank you ever so much for your time. Thank you, Corinne.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Duncan.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.